In this lesson, we'll get our character inside of Ogre. It's extremely simple to do, and as we'll discover in just a little bit, it comes down to just a few lines of short code. So let's go ahead and get that set up. The first thing that we'll need to do is to take the Ogre mesh and skeleton that we exported out of XSI and put it inside of the project folder that we're working with. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's the models folder where I temporarily stored the mesh and skeleton file. And here's the Ogre project that we're working with. We'll need to go ahead and take the mesh and the skeleton and put them in the media file, and we're specifically going to put them inside of the models folder because that's where the meshes and the skeletons are kept. So let's just take these two and drag and drop it here to copy them over. So we got the skeleton and mesh file in the models folder, and because of the way Ogre is set up, we'll be able to have access to these very easily in the code. Let's minimize these two and get started with the code. Let's go to the place where we typed in to do, load our XSI character here, specifically the create scene function. Let's replace the comment and type in the code that we need to use to get our XSI character inside of Ogre. So we're going to need two things. We're going to need an entity for one, and we're going to need a scene node. So let's go ahead and make that. Let's make the entity by typing in entity. We'll do asterisk ent1, so we're making a pointer, and the value of that pointer is essentially going to be an entity. Now this entity is very important because it is with that entity that we can actually load a mesh in the scene. So let's load a mesh into that entity, type in ent1 is equal to, and now we're going to use the scene manager of the example application to create the entity. So let's type in m scene mgr, that's just how we can access the scene manager. Then we'll use the indirectional operator to go in and create the entity. You can just type in a little bit of that word in there and you can see create entity is right here. And there we go, create entity. Now we can open the parentheses and plug in some parameters. We need to put in a string and we need to put in a prefab type. Now this first string over here is the name of the entity and it needs to be a unique name, much like in XSI. So let's give it a unique name. I'll just call this low res 1. So we got that in there. Let's go ahead and do comma. Now we know we need to load the prefab type. Now like I said before, the resource configuration file is set up in a very special way. So it'll already know, it'll already be able to access our low-res mesh just from its file name. So let's put the file name in there. Open quotes lowres.mesh. That's all that we need to do to load our low-res mesh that we exported from XSI into an entity. Now this entity needs to be loaded into a scene root node. So that scene node specifically, you can think of it almost as a way by which Ogre can decide if that object needs to be rendered. It can also scale it and do all kinds of transformations on it. So your scene node is almost like a transform node in XSI. So let's go in and make our scene node. So we'll type in scene node. We'll make a pointer variable to it also. So scene node asterisk node is equal to, and now we'll make just an empty child scene node, a child of the root. Kind of like we have a scene root, we're going to make an object inside of that scene root. So let's do that. We'll have to use the scene manager again, so type in m, s, and if you hit control space, the IntelliSense will fill in the rest for us, which is nice. Let's get the root of the scene, so get root scene node, hit enter, love that IntelliSense stuff. Put in the parentheses, and now we'll need to create a child scene node, so type in create child. You can go down here the list, there's child scene node, right here, you can double click that in there, we have that. Open and close the parentheses and end it with a semicolon. So now we've made our scene node. All we need to do is to attach the entity to that node. So do node attach object, and then we'll just supply the entity. So ent1. So that's all that we have to do to just simply load a mesh in our scene or in our Ogre scene. So it's that simple. Let's go ahead and test it. Just say yes, we want to build it. It's going to compile it and it's going to pull it up in just a couple of seconds. And there's it. And by the way, all of these are stored actually inside of the config files. So that's another really cool thing about the example application and how it's set up. So just bringing up the Ogre window. And now we can see a little white blob in the distance. That's our XSI character loaded up in the scene, but we really cannot do anything to it right now. So let's close our Ogre render window. And it's still running, which is something that's not too good, so let's just stop it right here. Now, the reason why it's behaving like that is because we haven't done a little bit of a step yet. we need to create a frame listener that essentially examines every frame of the action and does a corresponding reaction in return. It is through that frame listener that we'll be able to make updates to our scene, such as moving the camera, closing the windows, and updating our animation. We'll go ahead and implement that part of the code in the next lesson.